Welcome to the YMCA Youth for Youth Gambling Education Program. So today, in order to prepare you all for the contest that we are holding, we are going to be discussing gambling and how it relates to your generation. So let's start with something basic. Let's start with, what is gambling? And gambling is when you risk something of value and you do not know if you will win or you will lose. It is taking a risk to get a reward. Consider your daily life and the times that you are perhaps engaging in gambling-related activities without even realizing it. Activities such as daring your friends to do something or racing a friend to see who is faster. The act of taking a risk and betting something of value is in itself gambling. It is not only money that can be bet. Other things of value can be used to gamble with as well. Now, there are three elements to gambling. The first is the risk, and the risk is an activity where you do not control the outcome. The second is the value, and that is the object that is being wagered. And the third is the prize, and that is what will potentially be won. Now, the YMCA Youth for Youth Gambling Education Program uses three different approaches to gambling. The first is that we are gambling neutral. We embrace a neutral approach, which means we do not outright say gambling is bad, nor do we encourage it. We acknowledge it as an act that will take place, and we strive to provide individuals with the resources to make smart and well-informed decisions. The second approach is a balanced perspective. We speak out about the negatives and the positives of gambling, how these may affect the community and the people engaging in the act. The third is a harm reduction approach. This is a method in which risk is reduced. Now, when considering the harm reduction approach, look at the acronym ENGAGE. ENGAGE stands for Enter into Supportive Relationships, Negates Blame, Gives Options, Accepts Their Choices, Gains Awareness, and Educates around the potential harm. Now, let's look at some examples of some harm reduction approaches that we utilize on a daily basis. Let's look at wearing a seatbelt. We wear a seatbelt to reduce the harm and the risk if we were to get into an accident. We use a bicycle helmet to protect our head if we were to fall off of our bicycle. And we wear a life jacket in the pool if we are not good at swimming and need some assistance in staying afloat. Questions pertaining to youth. How does gambling affect you? Well, you are the first generation growing up in a culture where gambling is actively promoted. There have been a lot of advertisements, and you're the first generation to have grown up in a culture that has accepted gambling as a form of entertainment and an acceptable way of making money for charities and government funding. Youth do not participate in a traditional form of gambling. When considering gambling, you might think casinos, scratch tickets, and poker. But there are other ways that youth participate in the act of gambling, such as esports, fantasy sports betting, and even an act of loot box unlocking. All of these topics will be touched upon in our next video, so don't worry if you don't understand right away. So, do youth actually gamble? 10% of Canadian teenagers gamble online. They participate in gambling. Well, 40% of Canadian teenagers admit to gambling in any form, including cards, video games, bets with their friends. That means that there is also a problem gambling prevalence. 36% of youth who gamble both online and offline indicate a potential gambling problem. 8% among offline gamblers. So, the 8% are the individuals who do not gamble online, leaving a large percentage for the individuals who do gamble online and do believe that they could potentially develop a gambling problem. Let's look at the how and why youth gamble, beginning with the why. Well, they gamble for entertainment because it's fun, it feels good, there's a social setting associated with it. For excitement, it's a challenge, promise of a quick win, high energy action. It's an escape. You can escape boredom, depression, anxiety, loneliness, low self-esteem, and overall bad feelings. There's an economical reason. Basically, that's making money, chasing losses, paying back some debts. And finally, there's the egotistical reasons, which are to fulfill fantasies, increase reputation, improve your overall self-esteem, gain popularity, and to maybe acquire some power. Now, there's also the way that youth gamble. And how do you think youth gamble if they're not old enough to enter a casino? Well, they can gamble online or through video games, through lotteries, schools, charities, bets or dares, dice, scratch tickets, card games, quarters, and marbles. An important term to understand is problem gambling. Now, what is problem gambling? Problem gambling is the urge to gamble continuously despite the negative consequences or a desire to stop. When gambling becomes harmful to the individuals, it is then considered problem gambling. Let's look at some of the warning signs of problem gambling. Oftentimes, there is a perception that gambling addiction only has financial repercussions. However, that is not always true. Some of the other problem gambling signs could be behavioral, psychological, physical, and yes, of course, the financial. Anyone can become a problem gambler. It is a slow onset. You do not usually gamble once, then become addicted. Rather, if you are not self-aware, slowly but surely, it could become a coping mechanism. Some examples that you might hear is, I only feel safe when gambling, or I do it to distract myself, or I feel so good about myself when I gamble. Many people do not seek treatment for their problem gambling as they feel ashamed. They believe they can do it on their own. They're afraid of what the treatment is, or they're just embarrassed. When people refuse treatment, the problem can get worse. That is why it is important to encourage people to openly talk about what they are feeling. When addressing problem gambling, it is important to consider how the individual has changed. So let's consider some of the following to see how an individual's personality and behavior may change as a result of a problem gambling. Let's begin with behavioral signs. Some of those signs are unable to stop gambling, missing school, work, or other important commitments, not completing tasks or following through with responsibilities, neglecting relationships, increasing the amount of playtime, lying about your gambling, stealing to fund your gambling habit, and decreasing social interactions. Next, we can consider the financial signs, which are borrowing money, stealing money, money appearing and disappearing, debt, spending money before paydays, and chasing losses. How can you tell when gambling has become problematic? Well, for the most part, any activity that impacts a person's life in a negative way is problematic. Like stated prior, the signs will differ from person to person. But when you're considering the activity, look to see how it's impacting the individual's life. If the activity has negative implications, the activity is then considered problematic. A couple other signs are the psychological signs, and those include depression and anxiety when unable to play, anger or violence when prevented from playing, playing the escape problems, and playing for feelings of acceptance among peers. The psychological signs may be a bit more difficult to see as they are often not tangible. However, it is important to talk to the individual if they seem to be acting any different, which could include the aforementioned signs. It is, however, easy to hide the emotions one may be feeling. The things that may not be as easy to hide are the physical signs. The physical signs might include physical health impacts, like headaches, back pains, or strain, difficulty sleeping, fatigue, or unable to focus on tasks. Some problem gamblers have difficulty affording the necessities of life as they spend their time and money on gambling. So they may end up being unable to purchase food or clothing or even sleep properly. If the individual is gambling a lot, losing weight may become something that's more apparent. And if they're constantly looking sleep deprived, that's also a potential indication. And at that point in time, it's important to welcome a healthy conversation with them. So previously in this presentation, we discussed the topic of harm reduction in gambling, which is to reduce the risk in an associated activity. And we have just finished discussing signs and the different types of problem gambling. Now, let's apply some harm reduction strategies into the act of gambling. So, only gamble what you can afford to lose. Set money and time limits. Have a plan B to do other things. Do not mix gambling and drinking. Gamble with people you know. And hope to win, but expect to lose. When gambling, it is so important to engage the notion of hope to win, but expect to lose. The house always has the edge, and the longer you gamble, the more likely you are to lose. It is important to keep gambling as a source of entertainment. When you stop doing that, you begin to risk turning gambling into a source of dependency. So always go into it with the mentality of, oh, I'm doing this for fun. I'm doing this as a source of my entertainment. Don't do it because you feel that you are dependent on it and that it can fix all of your issues. Remember the ENGAGE acronym we utilized above and try to apply that into gambling. Let's look at a game of chance versus a game of skill. A game of chance is either you win the outcome or you lose it. If you are flipping a coin and you choose heads and it lands on tails, you lose. There is no system implemented that can help the player. Now, relating that back to gambling, let's think of a classic casino slot machine. If you play that slot machine 10 times, the 11th time you play it does not mean that you will win. You don't get better each time you play because the result of that game is left to chance. Now, a game of skill is when you may be provided with 3 lives. If you lose once, you still have 2 more opportunities to win, thus improving your overall success at the game. Practice can make an impact on your success when playing. Think of something like soccer. You can play soccer all your life. You get better and better every game because you're refining your skills. The outcome of that game can be influenced on your degree of skill in playing soccer. Now, in understanding gambling, you must understand odds and probability. Odds is the term used to describe the chance a person has of winning to losing. Probability is the chance of winning divided by the total number of possibilities. And then randomness is no matter how many times you play, your odds stay the same. Now let's put odds and probability into practice by applying it to a few examples. Starting with odds. A coin has 2 sides. The odds of getting heads is 1 to 1. There's 1 chance of winning and getting heads, and 1 chance of losing and getting tails. Another example you might want to consider is if there are 4 individuals competing for a prize and each player has 1 ticket, the odds of winning are 1 to 3. It's important that youth always know the odds when playing a game, as those odds are your chance of winning. Probability. So, a coin has 2 sides. The probability of getting heads is 1 and 2. One side is heads, and there are 2 sides total. Another way of looking at it with the tickets is if there are 4 individuals competing for a prize and each player has 1 ticket, the probability of winning is 1 in 4. Finally, we have randomness. And randomness is just if a coin is flipped twice, there's no guarantee that the first flip will be heads and the second flip will be tails. It's all chance and it's all very random. Thank you for completing this first video. For those of you interested, the Ontario Problem Gambling Helpline is listed below, as well as their website. Also, please remember to register at the mentioned link. Contest closes on April 1st, and it is important that you are up to date with all your critical information to ensure your success in this contest. Thanks again.